All right, let's get into it. Blackfin tuna. Who loves catching blackfin tunas? Right? We all love catching blackfin tunas. Two classes of blackfin tuna, footballs and fatties. Okay, that's how I look at them. Footballs and fatties. I'm not too thrilled with catching the footballs. I really like catching the fatties. Okay, and that's really what we're going to focus on tonight, is how to find and fool the big blackfin tunas. And this may be a relatively short seminar compared to most of them because I'm not going to feed you any fluff. I'm going to tell you straight up. This is how you do it. This is where you go. This is what you do when you get there. Bottom line, period. There's no, secret sauce to this. The secret sauce is preparation and execution. It's about being ready for it and going out there and doing it. Okay, you're not going to catch them sitting on the couch. If you go out one time and you're unsuccessful, don't cry, and say, hey, well, I'm not catching them. You went out one time for 2 hours, from 2 in the afternoon to 4 in the afternoon, on a Saturday, during a tournament. What'd you think was going to happen? Okay, I mean, you really have to put in the time. So let's start with the fish itself. Blackfin tuna, the smallest of all tuna species, yet they have the largest eye proportionate to their body of all tuna species. So what does that tell us? It's the smallest tuna, but he's got the best eyesight. Okay? And real important that you remember that, because successfully finding and fooling the largest tuna, flagged, is all about stealth. It's all about stealth. Okay? Really, really important to remember. The smaller fish, the footballs, fish that are 3 pounds to 8 pounds. Okay, in that ballpark. They're the shape of footballs. They look like footballs. We call them footballs. You can catch them out here any day of the year. Literally 365 days of the year, these little schooly football blackfins are cruising up and down the coast. They're relating to structure. All you got to do is get on any of these wrecks and just drop a jig down, and it shouldn't be long before you find some small football blackfins. Another tactic is to troll. You can troll for these smaller tunas with very small feathers, 3 and 4 inch lures. Not any of these big lures that look like they can catch a big blue marlin. You're not going to catch the blackfin tuna on those big baits. They prefer really, really small baits. So remember that if you want to stay busy and if you're just looking to, bend some rods, go out there, jig on some wrecks in anywhere from 100 to 300 feet, or troll around in that same depth with small feathers fished away behind the boat, and it shouldn't be long before you catch some footballs, any day of the year. And that's about as much as I'm going to say about the small tunas, because they're just not that exciting. Now there's the whole other class of blackfin tuna, as I referred to earlier, called fatties. When I first started fishing down here, I was fascinated by these blackfin tuna because my history is working on tuna boats. We used to fish up in the Northeast, out in the canyons for yellowfins, big eyes, longfin tunas, bluefin tuna, closer to shore. And we're talking fish up to 300 pounds. Heck, I had a giant bluefin tuna one year that was 824. So really, really big tunas, and a lot of them. Back in the day, it was not uncommon on a headboat with 20 guys fishing 2 days out in the Hudson Canyon to come back with 200 yellowfins. That doesn't happen anymore. Okay, not at all. Nevertheless, I came down here, and of course, short of running to the Bahamas, we don't have a yellowfin tuna fishery down here. Occasionally, one is caught on a kite bait, or somebody trolls one, or somebody might hook one on a jig, but that's the rarity. Okay? For the most part, I don't want to say for the most part, we only have blackfin tunas. Okay? That's what we have. So I really went on a mission to learn how to find and catch these blackfins. First the small ones, and then the big ones. And what I learned from watching all of these tournaments before I even got involved in tournaments was all of the guys who won these tournaments, what did they have in the boat? Bait. He said bait. It's a good answer. Okay. I'll tell you what they had in the boat. They won the tournament because they had 4 blackfin tunas in the boat, in addition to their king mackerel and any other fish that they may have had. We all know, or if you don't know, most of the meat fish tournaments that take place right here, the ladies fish off, the rodeo, all of, the saltwater shootout, slam, you're allowed to weigh in 10 fish, 4 of any particular species, and that could be dolphin, cobia, wahoo, blackfin tuna, and of course king mackerel. So the strategy is very simple on all of these tournaments. The very first thing that I need to do in the morning is get my 4 king mackerel in the boat. My weighers, as we call them, because the fish need to be a minimum of 10 pounds in order to qualify. So all of these tournament guys, not charter guys, all these tournament guys, they'd go out with a mission in the morning to catch their big king mackerel. And a lot of them would run 50 miles all the way up to Jupiter or anywhere from here to Jupiter. After they got their 100 pounds or so of king mackerel, they then needed to switch gears because you can only weigh in 4. So how do you accumulate more weight? You target the blackfin tunas. And the guy who was able to weigh in 8 to 10 fish consisting of big king mackerel and big blackfins would win the tournament. You'd see the same names. You probably still see the same names. You know, 1st to 10th place is probably the same guys year after year. It's because they're really, really dialed in, not only on catching those kings, but on catching the tuna, okay? And at first, I'll tell you, man, I had a lot of frustrating experiences. I couldn't find these things. I couldn't find them. I couldn't catch them. I was really getting frustrated. I like to consider myself a pretty educated angler, even 20 years ago. And I'd go out and fish and just couldn't score, you know, and it really became frustrating, especially when I saw other boats that were catching them. Who wants to catch more fish? Who wants to Some people didn't raise their hands. Who wants to catch more fish? Who wants to catch bigger fish, right? Well, I was the same guy with the same logic and said, well, how do I do that? Let me learn more about these tunas. And I'm going to share with you everything that I learned, and really I'm going to flat out tell you how to do it, okay, period. So understand that this is a magnificent hunter. Not only does he have incredible eyesight, but he can hunt and feed in 80 feet of water or on the bottom in 880 feet of water. That is a huge territory, a vast territory where these big blackfin tunas can hunt and feed. I know that because we've caught them in 80 feet of water, 100, 120, 140, et cetera, all the way on out to over 800 feet of water, jigging for golden tilefish, and you get hooked up, and guess what you got? A big 25, 30-pound blackfin tuna. And you say to yourself, what in the world is a 25 to 30-pound blackfin tuna, fatty, doing on the bottom in 880 feet of water outside Hillsborough Inlet? Anybody want to take a guess at what he's doing? He's eating. Exactly, he's eating. They will go anywhere they can to feed. And one of their primary food sources is squid. And squid live on or near the bottom. It's that simple in the pitch black. And the fact that this tuna, this 30-pound tuna, in icy, frigid waters, nearly 1,000 feet below the surface, can cruise around on the bottom in pitch black and pick off these small little squid that are this big. Literally, they're an inch, okay? And he can just shovel as many of them he can into his mouth. To me, that's a magnificent predator. And you know what? He shouldn't be easy to fool, and he's not easy to fool. He really isn't, and he shouldn't be. But I know how to fool him, and you're about to learn how to fool him too, okay? So we know they've got a vast range as far as depth and what they can, you know, what they can tolerate, okay? Season, right now, I cannot stress this enough, as far as Pompano Beach is concerned, you are in the epicenter of the Southeast Florida fatty blackfin tuna fishery, right here. This is it. This is X marks the spot. And peak season is May 1st. That's when it really starts to fire up. May and June, those 2 months, is when you're going to have your shot at catching these bigger blackfin tunas. Look, you can go out any day of the year and pluck off 1 or 2 big fish, okay? But now is when it's on. That's why all of the tournaments are right now. It's not coincidence. It's because there's the most fish migrating through the area. And that's why it's so important for you to get dialed in right now, because the next 2 months are going to dictate what your tuna season is like here in South Florida. So how do we do it? You know, first and foremost, we know the fish are here, Okay, we know that they don't like bright lights, or I should say, you know, a bright sun and bright daylight. Like all tuna species, they have large eyes, like we talked about earlier. It gives them the ability to find food in the pitch black way down deep, like we just mentioned. But because they have such a large eye, bright sunlight also affects them. So they like the darker, cooler conditions, the low light conditions. So first thing in the morning, when that sun is just coming up, not even, before the sun even comes over the horizon, we have what we call false light, okay? Peak feeding period for the blackfin tuna. Here's one way to catch them. I highly doubt anybody here is going to do this, but I did it many, many times. I hope that you do it, but I doubt you will, and I'll explain why. The first step involves you waking up at 3 in the morning. Okay, there goes everybody right there, okay? Get up at 3 in the morning. Everybody's like, all right, forget it, Mike. We're going to go just troll the little footballs. Forget the fatties. We don't want any of that part. Okay? Get up at 3 in the morning, go catch bait. Go catch pilchards. Okay? By the pier, put a chum bag in the water. Wherever it is that you're going to catch your pilchards, load up on pilchards. Okay? As many as you possibly can. If you're going to buy them by bulk. Okay? You want to have as many live baits as you possibly can. You don't need goggle eyes, you don't need thread fins, you need pilchards. I don't care what size they are. As many as you can. And when I say as many as you can, I'm not talking about 36. I'm talking about 336 at a bare minimum. Okay, a lot of bait. Then at around 5 o'clock, because you've caught all your bait now, you're going to start to make your way a little bit north, up off of Boca and Delray, up off that area. And you're going to find a cozy little spot in 130 feet of water. And it's still dark. It's pitch black. Okay, so take your time cruising up there because it's dangerous running boats at night. So be careful. And you get up there, 5 o'clock in the morning, anchor up, get your rods ready. You only need 2 rods, okay, depending on how many people you have on the boat. And at around 5:30, while it's still dark, start throwing live baits. Start live chumming off the back of the boat while you're anchored. It's imperative that you're anchored. It's imperative that you have some current. 9 out of 10 times the current's going to be running to the north, which is perfect. You're in 130, you're anchored, the current's running to the north, and you're throwing a steady stream of live baits. As soon as you're able to look out and go, wait, all right, I can see a little bit. You're starting to see some big splashes behind the boat. And it's going to be a mix of bonitas and blackfin tunas, big blackfin tuna. You have approximately 30 to 45 minutes to catch as many as you possibly can before the bite just goes whoop and shuts down. Okay? So you need a lot of live bait. Feed out a live bait, 30 or 40 pound fluorocarbon leader, relatively heavy rod. You could even bump it up to 50 pound at that point because still really low light conditions, and you're live chumming. And when you live chum, what happens? A frenzy. Everything going on behind the boat, it's a frenzy. It's a feeding frenzy. So the fish aren't that picky during a feeding frenzy. Okay, the blackfin tunas are not going to swim up to a pilchard and go, stop! It's 50 pound, not 40 pound. Don't eat that bait. Okay, don't eat that bait. Eat that one. That's not going to happen. Okay, so during that feeding frenzy when you're live chumming, you can beef up your tackle a little bit. Nevertheless, you can catch those big blackfins just like that. Not something everybody's going to do. I understand it requires you to lose sleep, but I promise you that you're going to feel like a hero when you're coming back in the inlet at 8 a.m. with your big blackfins on ice and everyone else is just leaving and your day's over. Okay, there was a stretch there where we were just addicted to this and literally would do it every night. Now, of course, it's a gamble because if you don't catch the bait, you're not catching the blackfins. That's the bottom line. Okay? And of course, if you're tournament fishing, this doesn't apply to you because obviously you can't fish that early in the morning. So if you're just fun fishing, that's one way to catch them. We also know kite fishing, right? Kite fishing is incredibly popular and how most of the big blackfin tunas are caught here. This is not a kite fishing seminar. We had that a couple of months ago. If you missed it, please check out Florida Sport Fishing TV Plus. And you can watch that seminar, okay, where we talked all about kite fishing, but there's some nuances and some things that you need to know when it comes to chasing blackfin tunas, the big blackfins, when you're kite fishing, that are really game changers. So early in the morning or late in the afternoon during low light conditions, those big blackfin tunas will be up on the edge feeding between 100 and 180. That's really the magic little area. If you had to narrow it down even more, 120 to 160. However, that's going to vary. You know what it's going to vary based on? The clarity of the water, the quality of the water. Blackfin tunas, the big blackfin tunas, are not going to be in that pea soup green water that you'll catch kingfish in. You're not going to find the blackfins in that, so don't even waste your time looking for them. You've got to find nice, clean blue water. If it has that purplish hue, you guys know what I'm talking about, that Gulf Stream, man, that's money right there. Especially if you start to see flying fish, birds picking, some scattered weed. Put the pieces to the puzzle together. Okay, it's one thing to find clean water, but if it's dead water and if it's empty, you're not going to catch anything. You've got to have some other elements mixed in with that water. And sometimes that water pushes in shallower, 80 to 120 feet, and sometimes it's out deeper, 280 to 350 feet. You've got to fish that water. That's really, really important when it comes to the big blackfins. You can pick off sailfish in dirty water. You can pick off cobias, certainly king mackerel, but when it comes to the big tuna, very, very rarely are you going to find them in anything other than perfect water. So that's very, very important. Understand that water for a second. When I say clean water, you guys, like I did for decades, fish right here at a Hillsborough Inlet, and then you have Boca Inlet. You have the Gulf Stream that's flowing this way to the north. Everybody with me so far? If I lose anybody, say, Mike, you're losing me. The Gulf Stream's flowing to the north, right? Sometimes that Gulf Stream will push in close to shore. 100 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet. You've got the current flowing to the north. The water's nice and blue and clear. However, now it's an outgoing tide. It's an outgoing tide. So water is being pushed out of these inlets, and it's not clean water. It's an outgoing tide. It's dirty, nasty, intracoastal water, right? Well, that water is going to eventually meet the edge of that Gulf Stream, and it's then going to flow north. It's going to push up north, and it's going to create an edge. If you're on this side of the edge, on the dirty intracoastal water side, you're not catching big blackfins, buddy. Not going to happen. If you're on this side, you're catching big blackfins. So I cannot stress enough how important it is that you read the water and that you understand what is happening. And there are times when you'll be fishing a pocket of clean water and suddenly you're like, what the heck? And it just went from blue to green, right? Or the other way around. You're in green water and suddenly it went all blue. There could be a little eddy, there could be a break right there. And there's times you have to follow that water. It's moving to the north. The current's moving to the north. You've got clean water. Suddenly it went green. Where did the blue water go? It didn't go behind you. Okay? It didn't go this way. It went this way. So there's times you have to pick up and run a mile, 2, 3, 5, however you have to go to get back into that clean water. Okay? And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's one of the most important ingredients to catching the big blackfins is the quality of the water that you're fishing in. And the more of those elements that that water has, the blue color, the bait, scattered weed, of course, the better that it is. Low light, like I said, early in the morning, of course, at dawn is going to be your optimal time. So the first 2 hours of daylight or the last 2 hours of daylight. And don't be afraid, you know, there's many times in May and June, you can leave the dock at 5 in the afternoon. You have one thing in mind, big blackfin tunas. Leave the dock at 5 in the afternoon and fish from 6 to 8 p.m. Fish until it gets dark, till you can't see your kite anymore. The tunas are still there. As a matter of fact, they feed all night. Go down to the Fish City Pride, whatever the name of that other, I don't know the name of that other boat, but the Fish City Pride there. Starlight, is that what? Okay, whatever it is, but they catch tunas all night on their night trips. Okay, I'm not saying they catch them all night, every night. I'm saying during this time of the year, they will pick off big blackfin tunas even at night. Those fish feed at night. Do not be under the impression that they don't. They're tuna. They feed 24 hours a day. They grow incredibly fast. They burn a tremendous amount of energy, and they need fuel constantly. Did you ever gut a tuna and have an empty stomach? Okay, they're not like wahoo. You know, in my wahoo seminar, I told you got to find wahoo that haven't eaten yet. Blackfin tuna are the opposite. That damn thing, man, he's just filled with squid and all sorts of food, and he still ate your bait. You're like, what are you trying? You know, they never stop eating. They're eating machines because they're moving so fast and they're burning so much energy. And they're a schooling fish. So when you have a school of fish that are hunting, okay, they really need to be competitive. They can't be selective, because if they don't eat that bait, Freddie over here is going to grab that bait. Okay, so really they have to feed a lot. Like I said, low light, early in the morning, or late in the afternoon. When you are kite fishing, when we generally kite fish for king mackerel or for sailfish, we're using all sorts of, I'll call it hardware. We've got floats, we've got all sorts of stuff on our rigs. This is my kite rod for blackfin tuna, right here. It is a Chaos 7-foot rod rated for 15 to 30 pound class. And like I say also in all my seminars, if you're not fishing Chaos rods, you might as well go home right now, people, because you're not going to catch anything, especially not the big blackfin tunas. We've trained them. They only bite for people who are fishing the black and gold Chaos rods. Okay? It's matched to a Talica 16, a Shimano Talica 16, loaded with high-vis line, so it's easy to see it going up to the kite and down into the water. Okay, 20 or 30 pound, you can fish either, depending on your skill set and what you're comfortable fishing. However, because the blackfin tuna have such great eyesight, we do not fish that high-vis line anywhere near the hook. There's a 30-foot leader, a 40-pound diamond presentation fluorocarbon, 40 feet between the high-vis line and the actual hook itself. There are no other terminal tackle elements on here. The only other thing that we have is a ceramic ring right on the line itself, which goes into the kite clip. And you guys know what I mean with that little ceramic ring. Very, very important that you use that, because you don't want your line to get caught in the clip or chafed up in the clip. So just a little black ceramic ring. The hook itself is a J hook. When I'm fishing for blackfins, there's one prime bait. Goggle eyes. Okay? Pilchers is a great bait. It's not a mistake. It's a great bait. But it's nowhere near as good of a bait as a goggle eye. A goggle eye is a heavy bait. It's a big bait. It's very tempting for a big blackfin tuna. It stays alive much longer than a pilchard stays alive. Now, if you can't get goggle eyes and you can only fish pilchards, by all means, of course, better than nothing. But if you had goggle eyes, the gog is going to be a far better bait for big blackfin tunas. It's a 7.0 J hook. I'm not bridling that bait. This is a VMC live bait hook, 7.0. The hook size is going to depend on the bait size. If it's a goggle eye, it's a 7.0. If it's a pilchard, it's a 5.0. Because if I took this 7.0 hook and put it in a pilchard, what's going to happen to the pilchard? He's gone. Okay, I'm putting too big of a hole in him. So your hook size has to, associate with the bait size. But not all hooks are created equal. Make sure that it's a strong hook, because let me tell you something, you're going to be putting a lot of heat on those fish. The reason there is no float, sometimes you'll hook a 30-pound blackfin tuna, you're fighting that fish, and suddenly, pop, gone. You lose them. You bring it up, your entire rig's gone. You know why your rig's gone? Because a damn king mackerel chased your float through the water and ate it, okay, and cut you off. So we eliminate that altogether with no additional terminal tackle, especially when you're tournament fishing. Number two, you don't need the float. A float is nothing more than a strike. I don't even want to call it a strike indicator. It's just an indicator of where my line is. When I'm looking off the side of the boat, I'm fishing 3 lines, 3 baits off my kite, a short, a mid, and a long. And I could see, obviously, the floats. If they're different colors, it's easy to distinguish which is which. However, it doesn't serve really any other purpose. And it has some detriments to it as well. For example, it catches wind. If there's any breeze, it could catch that float and pull your bait up and out of the water. Okay, keep that in mind. So we eliminate the floats. I do not need my goggle eye right up on top, and I don't need a float telling me it's on top. I'm a fisherman. I'm kite fishing. If I've reached a point in my angling career that I'm willing to spend $200 on a fancy schmancy fishing kite and $1,900 on a kite rod and reel, whatever it costs, and go out there and fly this thing in the air and fish 3 lines, and I've got thousands of dollars invested in all of this and hundreds of hours, I don't need a float to tell me where my bait is, okay? I've got my own eyes. And if my bait's up in the air, I'm going to see it. Anybody ever go kite fishing and their bait goes up in the air and it's flying through the air? Some people call it a flying fish, okay? You're not going to catch any blackfin tuna if your goggle eye is this far off the water. I don't care how hard you try. You're not going to, okay? But you don't need a float to tell you that. You're looking out going, oh shit, is that my bait? Yeah, let me drop that into free spool, right? And drop that back down. Now, if the goggle eye is 10 feet below the surface, is that okay? Absolutely, that's okay. He's right there. Trust me when I tell you the blackfin tunas are going to find them. They're going to find them. And also trust me when I tell you, you're going to know when you get a bite because you're going to be looking out and suddenly it's going to look like somebody dropped the Volkswagen in the water. You know, just a big explosion, a big splash. That's that blackfin tuna just blowing up on your goggle eye, okay? And he's running off with it. So for me, I stick to an absolute minimum as far as additional hardware. I keep it as stealthy as possible. That's first and foremost. Next, get it away from the boat. Blackfin tunas don't like your boat. Get it away from the boat. Your kite, when you've got a kite set up, especially if you're going to, I don't want to say specifically set up your kite just for blackfin tuna fishing, but the distance from the kite to the first clip should be no less than 100 feet. So there's 100 feet right there. In between clips, approximately 75 feet. So you're talking about a football field minimum from beginning to end. However, when you are specifically targeting the blackfin tuna, let it rip. Get it out there further, okay? Get your bait out there. You don't want your bait to be around that boat. You want your short bait to be where your long bait generally is. Everybody follow me there? So you've got 3 baits. If I'm, sail fishing or king mackerel fishing, it's set in one position. If I want those blackfin tunas, end of the day of a tournament, it's the last couple hours, I need those big blackfins in the boat, or at least one. Push it, let it rip. Get that short bait where the long bait is. You've got plenty of line on the reel. This is why we fish these Shimano Talicas. They'll hold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of yards of line. You don't need to worry about getting spooled, okay, by any means. So get it out there away from the boat. Now, what happens, you're kite fishing, big blackfin comes up, jumps on your long bait. And you get bit on the long bait because that's the furthest one away from the boat, right? It's the furthest one away from the boat, big explosion, you reel up all the slack, pops out of the clip, and you're fighting this blackfin tuna. Other than you, who is actually fighting the blackfin tuna, the person next to you, what should be the first thing that he does? Pop open that kite reel and let it fly. Pop open those other rods and take your 2 shorter baits and get them right back out there where that long bait was, because there could likely be more blackfin out there. They're schooling fish. It's very rare, very, very rare to catch just one big blackfin. You're either going to catch them or you're not. Okay, I'm not saying you're going to catch them all day, but when the bite does turn on, it's usually with multiple fish because they swim in packs, they swim in schools. Okay, so when you blow, or when a fish blows up on your bait, instinctively you want to get your other baits right there where that fish blew up on it. So remember that on the kite side of things. Also, you're good? Marshall, I think he needs another beer. Where's those cocktail waitresses that you mentioned, right? Get them over here. Anyhow, You know what it is. Nowadays, nobody wants to work. It's crazy. Nobody wants to work. So back to the kite fishing. You know, late in the day, now you're putting all the pieces to the puzzle together. You've got to fish that clean water wherever that clean water is. I would rather be kite fishing for big blackfin tuna at the end of the day between 250 and 300 feet, if that's where the clean water is, than between 130 and 180 where you typically would find in Fooley's fish if there's green water inshore. So you've got to keep an eye all day long on that water and focus your efforts on that clean water, which, like I said, may push off, you know, or may never push in. So be open-minded to that. Don't think to yourself, oh, I don't want to go out there to 250 or 300 feet. I'm not going to catch any blackfins. Wrong. You're not going to catch them in 130 in that green shit right there. Excuse my language. Right? You need to be out there where that water's clean and where there's bait and some scattered weed. Okay, that's also why in a lot of these tournaments that you'll see, because they're all coming up here, right? May, June, July. You'll see in the afternoons the best of the best guys. They're kite fishing, but they're pushed out deeper. They're not out there looking for king mackerel, even though they will catch big kings out there. They're out there looking for the tunas. Okay. Now, middle of the day. Let's talk about that for a second, because the tuna love the low light conditions, right? Early in the morning, the first 2 hours of daylight, not uncommon to catch those fish between that 100 and 200 foot range. Last 2 hours of daylight, same thing. We can anchor up, we can live chum, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But that same 100 to 200 feet toward the latter part of the day, the end of the day, also excellent. But in the middle of the day, I was always fascinated by this. I'm like, or I should say mystified. I don't want to say fascinated, but I was like, where in the world are all of these big blackfin tunas in the middle of the day? How could they all just completely shut down? Because they do. They seem to shut down. You know, here, middle of the summer, May, June, July, you go out here, especially on a weekend, forget it. There's a million boats up and down the edge, right? Especially on a day when there's no wind and it's calm. You might as well go home. I mean, and you're out there at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Nothing is going on. But yet, earlier in the morning, there was a good hot blackfin tuna bite. And you know, later that evening, there's going to be a hot blackfin tuna bite between 6 and 8 p.m. Where are they in the middle of the day? I always used to think to myself that they're here. They're just not eating. That's what most people think, that they're here. They're just not eating. Wrong. They're eating and they're not here. Okay, at all. Because if they were there, they would be eating. They're not. The water's too hot, it's too clear, the sun is too bright, so they go further offshore and down to the bottom. Further offshore and down to the bottom. Where for many, many years, nobody either knew that or nobody was targeting the big blackfin tunas in 400 feet, 500 feet, right on the bottom in the middle of the day. There was a guy I knew who tried that. Okay, and who tried it a lot. And eventually, I don't want to use the word perfected it, but really dialed it in. And I realized that once 10 o'clock in the morning rolls around, forget it. I could stay on the edge and kite fish, but the chances of me finding these big blackfin tunas drastically reduce, you know, drastically. When I could go deeper offshore and fish 500 feet right on the bottom, even deeper, 600. 400, 450, and catch these fish all day long because they're out there eating. If you didn't hear what I just said, let me say it again to you. From 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., there are big blackfin tunas during the month of May and June that are on the bottom between 400 feet and 600 feet outside Hillsborough Inlet and outside Boca Inlet. And I'll tell you all of this now because I don't fish here now anymore. So I don't care. You're not coming to Marathon, the Florida Keys, and I'm not coming up here. So go out there, kill every one of them for all I care. I want you to. That's where they are, right there. But of course, you can't go out there and I mean, you can go out there and kite fish, but you're not presenting baits on the bottom because it's obviously too deep. You can't take a live bait like a pilchard or a goggle eye and drop it to the bottom at 500 feet because guess what's going to happen to the bait? It's going to die. Okay, and chances are you're going to have a big fat tangled rig and it's just going to be an absolute mess. So the only way to catch those fish out there is to jig. And we're going to get into that, but before I do, I want to backtrack just a little bit and get back to the kite fishing. There's a question that often arises when it comes to targeting the big blackfin tunas when you're kite fishing. And you don't have to be kite fishing. Look, if you don't have the kite, all of the gear, don't think you can't go out there and just fish flat lines, because you absolutely can. And what I mean by flat lines is I'm standing on the boat and I'm flatlining. I'm just feeding a bait out. Okay, I don't need a kite. Now, of course, I can't fish all the way around the boat. I can only fish on one side of the boat, right? But I could still fish and I could still catch fish, and you will. So you don't have to kite fish. But if you can, that certainly increases your odds dramatically. Now, the question of chumming or chunking is a popular question when it comes to blackfin tunas. There's no question, absolutely no question, without a shadow of a doubt, that if you can go out there with hundreds of live baits, you increase your odds by 1,000% to catch the big blackfin tunas. Not only to attract them to the boat, but to keep them around the boat. Because what happens a lot of times is you can be kite fishing or flatline fishing. A pot of tuna will come by, boom, boom. You'll get one or two bites, and they're gone. Gone. Do you know why they're gone? Because there was no reason for them to stay there. There was no food. There was no reason for the tuna to go, oh, wait, Charlie, Charlie, that's a good one, right? Let's hang on right here, right? Let's stay by this guy's boat. He's got a really neat-looking CV, all right? Let's just hang out by the boat. It doesn't happen. They're on the move looking for food. So if I'm throwing live bait and there's a ball of live bait under the boat, it only makes sense that I'm going to create this feeding frenzy, and it gives a reason for the fish to stay there. If I can't get live bait, there's an alternative, chunking. Chunking is also very, very effective for blackfin tunas. Not nearly as effective as live bait, but certainly a hell of a lot more effective than not chumming at all. Do not chum your typical bionic bait, bait masters, you know, tournament master, the 7-pound blocks of chum you put in a bag, you put the bag over the side. We all know what we're talking about, right? Don't do that. You're going to get sharks, grunts, bonitas, all of that stuff. You want to get flats of sardines or herring or dead gogs. I don't care if it's a mullet, fish, whole fish that are frozen. Cut them into bite-sized pieces and just a steady stream off the side of the boat as you're drifting. Okay, a steady stream. Don't overdo it, but make sure that you keep it nice and steady. While doing so, the person who's chunking should grab a spinning rod. Again, no unnecessary terminal tackle. This actually is a high-speed vertical jigging rod built by Chaos, but it just makes a perfect blackfin tuna stand-up rod for a spinner. And there's no reason why a rod that's designed for one application can't be used in a different application. That's what's so great about Chaos rods. You can catch everything on Chaos rods. Anyhow, the rod is matched to a Saragossa 10,000. It's an absolute workhorse of a spinning reel. It's not Shimano's top-tier spinning reel like a Twin Power or a Stella, but it certainly ain't bad. Okay, it's got an incredibly smooth drag, a lot of power. I know you'll appreciate this reel. It's loaded in 30-pound braid, and there is a lot of line on here. Easily 600 to 700 yards. There's a lot of line. These spools are deep. However, the braid, okay, is very visible. So once again, you'll see that we don't fish that braid right to the hook. 50 feet of 30-pound fluorocarbon. 50 feet. There's a big, big buffer between that bait and the braid. I do not want that fish to see the braid at all. The end of the rig is a very small 3/0 circle hook, a little VMC tournament circle hook. VMC makes a lot of circle hooks, tournament circle hooks, Sure Set circle hooks, Nemesis circle hooks. Just because something is called a circle hook, not all circle hooks are created equal. And if you go with something like a Sure Set circle hook, the gauge of the wire is very thin, and you will lose fish and straighten out hooks all day long. You need a heavy gauge hook. It's a small hook, but it's very, very strong. A 30-pound, who here has caught 30-pound blackfin tunas? Okay, handful of people, you know how strong they are. They're a very, very strong fish, and you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on that fish. This is no time to play games, because the longer your big blackfin is in the water, what could happen? Sharked. So I want to hook that fish, I want to fight him, I want to enjoy the fight, but I want to get him in the boat in one piece. So if I'm fishing inferior tackle that requires me to fight that fish for an hour, chances are something's going to happen. Tackle failure, shark failure, something. So make sure again that that hook is a thick gauge hook. You take a small chunk and you hide that circle hook in that small chunk, and you just feed out the chunk at the same rate of the chunks that you're throwing. Some guys will take slabs of bait. They'll cut all the chunks in advance. They'll have them in a 5-gallon bucket. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just to have a little cutting table on the boat, little fillet table, throw a couple herring up there, chunk them up, throw it. Wait a few minutes, cut another one, throw it. In other words, cut them as you go. Okay? I don't care how you do it, just do it. Okay? And just chunk as you're drifting, and that is a very effective means of not only attracting the big blackfins to the boat, but keeping them there long enough to turn one bite into 3 bites. Okay? Real important. They may ultimately leave. They may go, you know what? I really didn't like this. You know, I ate a couple bites and I'm gone. I don't care. We already caught 3. So real important. We know it works because when you're cutting the blackfin tunas at home, guess what's in their bellies? The chunks, right? So of course it works. Spinner is all you need. Anybody can do this. You don't need anything super fancy schmancy. So again, that's what I would recommend. That absolutely, if you can live chum, it's going to give you a huge advantage. If not, then chunk. Okay? If you're not going to chunk, then you are very limited to catching one here and one there, because even a blind squirrel will find a nut every now and then. Okay? It's okay. We're just recording this for the world to see. Go ahead. Oh, it's Marshall. Oh, it's okay. Okay. So getting back to it, we talked about the chunking. Okay. Now let's get back to the recent conversation of jigging, which is absolutely my favorite way of catching these big blackfin tunas. Not something that was done very often for a long time because no one, like I said earlier, nobody really thought the tunas were out there. And I want to tell you honestly, I did not go out there looking for blackfin tuna. I went out there because at 10 in the morning, that blackfin tuna bite shut down. The kite fishing shut down. There's no wind. It's blistering hot. Sometimes there's no current. And you need something else to do during the day, right? To fall back on. Hey, let's go jig some tilefish, some gray tilefish. And suddenly, we're not catching the gray tilefish. We're catching the blackfin tunas mixed with the gray tilefish right on the bottom. At first, I thought it was a fluke. 58 trips later, no fluke. Okay? We do get fluke. So 58 trips later, I realized this obviously isn't a fluke. They're out there. So like I said, there's no better way to do it than to jig. This is your typical slow pitch jigging rod. And when I use the term slow pitch jigging, I don't want you to get scared. I don't want you to think that you need to be some sort of specialized fisherman who's got a lifetime of experience and you're really dialed in on slow pitch jigging. Basically what I'm saying is drop a piece of metal to the bottom and move it. Okay? And as long as you have the ability to do that, you're going to catch some fish. Now, of course, there's some tackle that's designed specifically for that, which offers you a huge advantage. This is a slow pitch jigging rod that I actually designed that, of course, they sell here. It's 6'3". It's rated for 150 to 400 grams, which, by the way, all slow pitch jigs are not rated by ounces. They're rated by grams. Okay? And from your high school or college days, you know how many grams are in an ounce. Okay? Anyhow, very light rod, Torre carbon fiber, very, very sensitive, incredibly strong, but very light. It's matched to a Shimano Oshia Jigger 2000, okay? A A lot of options here. The Trinidad 16N from Shimano is also a great jigging reel. There's a lot of options. This happens to be my favorite. Loaded with 30-pound diamond braid, a 25-foot leader, a 40-pound diamond presentation fluorocarbon. The leader is tied to the braid with an Alberto knot. I told you I was telling you everything, and I'm going to tell you everything. The leader itself is tied to the jig with an improved clinch knot. If you don't know how to tie an improved clinch knot, which is called a fisherman's knot, you should be playing golf and not fishing, okay? It's a basic fisherman's knot. That's all that it is. You don't need to know anything fancy. The Alberto knot to connect the braid to the leader, Google Alberto knot. There's step-by-step instructions, okay? A uni to uni, I don't care how you do it. The point is you can't use a swivel because you've got these tiny little guides on these slow pitch rods. You're not using any sort of wind-on system, okay, with a swivel or anything like that. And all you need is just a bulletproof connection between the braid and the fluorocarbon leader. As far as the jig is concerned, basically anything long and silver and slender. It's going to get to the bottom fast. It's 250 grams is the ideal weight. And really the #1 jig that I have found here for blackfin tuna is this right here. It's called the Sardine 250. Right there. That's what it looks like. One side is all flash. One side has glow stripes on it. It has assist hooks on the bottom and the top. You don't need the assist hooks on the bottom and the top if you're specifically targeting tuna. But when you are jigging 400 to 600 feet, guess what else you're going to catch? Blue line tilefish. What's another prized bottom fish that you will catch out here in 400 to 600 feet? Snowy grouper. Did I hear somebody say snowy grouper? Snowy groupers. So it's nice to have the assist hooks when you hook those snowy groupers. And by the way, I'm not sure how many of you know this or not, but outside Hillsborough Inlet, 550 feet is a sunken submarine. It's just north of the inlet and 550 feet. Get to that sub. We call it the sub. Again, I'm not going to give you the numbers, but if you dig hard enough, you'll probably find them somewhere. The blackfins are all over it, and the snowy groupers are on it, and there's big tilefish on it as well. The only trick is the current. If there's too much current, you can't fish it effectively. You want current, you want to be able to move. You want the boat to be moving and to cover ground. Half a knot, 0.8, 1 knot, 1.2, it's all okay. Once you start getting into 1.8, 2 knots, forget it, go do something else. You just can't achieve that proper presentation. You're going to take your jig and you're going to drop it all the way to the bottom, all the way to the bottom. And you're going to work that jig 50 feet up off the bottom. And then you're going to drop that jig back to the bottom. And you're going to work that jig 50 feet up off the bottom. And you're going to do that as many times as you can before either, boom, you're hooked up because you've got a tuna on, or your line is scoped out, at which point you have to reel it all the way up and start over again and drop it back down. Pay very close attention. Keep your thumb on the spool. The tunas are notorious for eating the jig as it falls. So as it's going down, if suddenly your line is completely slack, what happened? You got him, baby. He ate your jig. Reel, okay? And that is one reason the Oshia jigger, Shimano's Oshia jigger, has such an advantage. When I put this reel in free spool, okay, and that jig is dropping, as it's dropping, my thumb is on the spool. I'm not restricting the speed that the jig is dropping because I want it to get to the bottom as quickly as possible. But my thumb is on there, and I know where the bottom is. Suddenly, I went slack. I do not even need to waste the time to lock it up. Look what happens when I turn the handle. It automatically engages. Okay, it was designed specifically for jigging. So again, I'm dropping it, boom, line went slack. Instantly, I can crank that handle, get up any slack, and now I'm hooked up. Okay, not all of the tuna that you jig on the bottom in 400 to 600 feet are going to be 25 to 30 pounds, because not all blackfin tuna are 25 to 30 pounds. And anybody that tells you that everyone you catch is going to be a fatty and not a football is fibbing you. Okay, you're going to catch mixed size fish. But in order to catch the fatties, you got to weed through the footballs. And there's nothing the matter with that. Just let those small ones go, because now, of course, you can only keep 2, okay, blackfins. Back in the day, that wasn't the case. Right now, May and June, we predominantly have a southeast breeze. So I would start on the deeper side of things, maybe 500 feet, go right outside Hillsborough Inlet, right to 500 feet. Stop the boat, start jigging, and you're going to be pushed up and in. And when you get to 350, go straight back out to 500 feet and keep doing this pattern. Okay, and every single time you get a bite, pay attention. How deep was I? Where in the water column, etc. And you'll see a pattern emerge. Now, remember, when I'm out there looking for these tunas in the deep water, I'm not looking for tuna on my Furuno machine, on my sounder. You know what I'm looking for? Bait. I'm looking for squid. If I find the squid, the tuna are going to be there. The squid show up on my machine as a little layer of fuzz suspended just off the bottom. Everybody has different machines, the Simrads, Raymarines, Garmins, whatever. I don't know what it looks like on your screen. I'm telling you on my Furunos, very distinguishable. You'll see a little layer of fuzz. That's what I'm looking for, because if I find the food, I'll find the tuna. These things are moving. They're moving fast. I'm fishing straight up and down, or in other words, my sounder is straight up and down, my transducer. There could be fish 100 yards away that are moving in this direction. I may not see them or even know that they're there. So if I drive around all day looking for readings for fish, especially in that deep water, I'm going to be burning a lot of fuel. And no, like, they're not bringing gas down to $3 a gallon anytime soon. Okay, we know that. So it's a very efficient way to fish, to be out there to drift and cover all of that ground, because again, you're not burning a lot of fuel, you're not looking for fish, you're looking for the bait. Will you catch them if you don't find the bait? Yes, because you may not have bait right here, but a quarter mile up, a half a mile up, a mile up, there may be a pile of squid on the bottom. And most of the squid that these tunas are eating down there, I'm telling you, they're this big. They're really cute. You know, they're like 2 inches. Really, really small, really cute, but they'll eat hundreds of them until they're just absolutely stuffed. And then they'll still eat your jig as well. So I cannot stress it enough. You've got to use the right tackle, because you're going to get fatigued if you use really heavy equipment without braid, and if you're only fishing mono, you're just not going to be able to jig properly. So you've got to fish the braid in that deep water. Okay, a 250-gram jig is fine. There are times when you may need to bump it up to 300 grams, 350, maybe even 400. If I can't get away with fishing a 400-gram jig in 500 feet of water, I'm not jigging. There's too much current. I'm going to do something else, okay? Maybe fishing shallower. That's one huge advantage. Not that this is a jigging seminar, but that's a huge advantage to jigging, that you could fish 100 to 1,000 feet of water with the same one rod and reel, and you can go back and forth and follow the conditions, you know what I mean, depending on what you're finding. And you just can't do that with many other fisheries. Color of the jig. This is one of the things that baffles me, you know, the most, is when it comes to jig color. What's your favorite jig color? Green. Somebody else tell me. Glow. Silver. I heard orange. I heard gold. Anything with glow. Red. Okay, there's 125 people here. I'm probably going to get 125 different answers, right? Everybody has a preference for a particular color. You very likely have a preference for a particular color jig because you fished that jig more than any other jig. So ultimately, you catch more fish on that color. And in turn, it suddenly becomes the hottest color jig in creation. I'm going to tell you a little story about a jig color. And the gentleman is actually on the boat right here. And I didn't tell you this on the boat when you were with me the other day, so you're going to learn something new. One of my favorite jigs of all time is called a Mobster 250. It's this jig right here. It's my favorite jig in the Keys, right here. It's long, it's slender, it mimics a ballyhoo. It's three-sided, it wobbles like crazy, it catches everything. I absolutely love this jig. Anybody who fishes with me on my boat knows they're fishing this jig right here. I've got this jig in a wide array of colors. My absolute favorite is that silver glow I just showed you. I also have it in blue. I've had great success with blue. I also have it in orange, which I absolutely hate and despise. I've never caught a single fish on the orange Mobster. I fished it 2 or 3 times, probably 5 minutes each time. Didn't have a bite. I said, this color sucks, and I just put it away. Okay? The other day, I got a couple guys on the boat, and I decided, you know, fishing lately, the jig fishing's been a little bit slow. Maybe I should try something different. Let me just spice it up just a little bit. I open up my jig bag, and lo and behold, staring me in the face is this orange Mobster. Hell with it. Let me tie it on. What's the worst that could happen? Guy drops it down, catches a big cobia on the orange jig. I love that jig, I'm telling the guy. That's a great color. I love that jig. I'm still fishing with my silver glow. I'm not getting bit. 5 minutes goes by, he drops down again. Another big cobia on the orange Mobster. Okay, guess what my favorite new color Mobster is? Orange. Okay, so point I'm making, color is, I don't know, you know, does it really make a difference? In my opinion, it's about shadows, it's about shading. It's always a good idea to have different colors because some show up brighter than others, but there's no bait fish that are pink. There's no bait fish that are, you know, purple with green polka dots, you know. It's just, a lot of the stuff that's created is designed to catch the fishermen, not the fish. It's far more important that the anglers are fishing the jig the right way. And that's what's most important. The guy who was fishing this jig was dialed in. I'm watching him, I'm like, man, you got really good rhythm right there. You're really working that jig well. And he had success. He caught quality fish. By the way, that second cobia came right up to the top, 10 feet away from the boat, looked at us, shook his head, and spit the jig out. Okay, while we watched it, you know. But still, he ate the jig, right? That's going to happen. So the bottom line is it's far more important to fish a jig or a lure the right way in the right place than it is the color of the lure. However, if I can only have one color, there is no doubt this would be it. Silver glow. Okay, you call it whatever you want. Okay, people have different companies have different names for it. This jig is from Jigs R Us, is the name of the company. Okay, the label looks just like this. From what I understand, they're going to be sold here at Chaos in the near future. So you may want to save your pennies and get this jig right here, the Sardine 250. They all work, like I said, in color, but if you only had to pick one, that would undoubtedly be it. Why? It has a lot of flash, and it has glow. So those are the two kind of combinations that, to me, seem to make the most sense. When you hook a tuna, by the way, when you're jigging, or any fish, remember that that is not the same type of outfit as a kite rod, where you're lifting up and pumping and reeling down. With the lighter jig rod, you're literally just holding it in front of you and just cranking and using the reel essentially as a winch. The rod is almost out of the equation at that point. But let's get back to our fatty blackfin tunas. So now we know early in the morning, where do we find these fish? We find them on the edge, low light conditions, 100 to 200 feet, as long as we have clean water, because they push in to feed. Okay, they push in on that reef edge to feed on anything that they can catch. They're indiscriminate killers. They will eat anything from crabs, shrimp, squid, finfish, baby tunas, dolphin, blackfin tuna will eat anything that it could possibly catch. Okay, so early morning, 100 to 200 feet. By 10 o'clock, that bite is over. Where am I going? Deeper water, and I'm going to drop down to the bottom. I'm going to jig fish on the bottom. When you're out there, when I'm looking for the blackfin tunas, and I'm jigging, and I'm in 400 to 600 feet, if I had to narrow that down, I would say 350 to 500, 350 to 475. would really be the kill box, the zone. When I'm dropping jigs to the bottom, wouldn't it make sense to take a spinning rod with a pilchard or even a squid and throw it out there? 2 of them, one off the bow, one off the stern. So before we start every drift, or I should say once we start every drift, before we drop our jigs down, we throw 2 spinners out. Because guess what you're going to catch on those spinners? That's right. Okay, 50% of the time, and I literally calculated it, 50% of the time, you'll get dolphin bites on those flat lines. So why not increase your odds? Because one 30-pound dolphin can switch, can change the entire day, can give you a lot of morale if everything else is slow. One of the most important factors about successfully targeting blackfin tuna is twofold. One, confidence. Confidence in what you're doing, where you're doing it, how you're doing it, and morale. Excuse my language, kids, hold your ears. If you got a shitty attitude, you're not going to catch big blackfin tunas. You're not, because it requires you to really be dialed in, to really be focused. And you may have to make sacrifices, because guess what? What don't you see here? Wire. No wire, okay, at all. So what does that mean? That means if a 40-pound smoker king mackerel eats my goggle eye, guess what I got? I don't even have a hook anymore, okay? If a big wahoo eats my goggle eye, what do I got? Nothing. So I am absolutely focused on the big blackfin tunas, and that means I have to sacrifice anything else that may eat this bait. So you have to make that decision. Now, not to say you're not going to catch, if you're fishing wire, will you still catch blackfin tuna? Yes, absolutely. Do your odds drop substantially? I believe so, because you've got this visible piece of wire hanging around your bait, and you're trying to tempt the fish that has the best eyesight in the world. So, of course, anything that doesn't look natural is going to decrease your odds. It makes sense. This isn't rocket science. It's fishing, and it makes sense. It's common sense. But if you don't fish the wire, like I said earlier, you risk losing some of those other toothy critters. As far as king mackerel are concerned, if I never catch another kingfish for the rest of my life, I think I'm going to be okay. It's going to be a struggle, but I think I'm going to be okay if I never catch another kingfish. Wahoo, on the other hand, I don't like to lose wahoo. Nobody likes to lose wahoo. But I'm not wahoo fishing. If I was wahoo fishing, I would fish wire, okay? I'm blackfin tuna fishing. So I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm going to feed my baits out and get them far away from the boat. I don't want to spook them. I'm going to make sure I'm in that nice clean water where the tuna are going to be, because they're not going to be in the dirty green water. I know that already. Okay? I'm going to fish no wire, and I'm going to go as stealthy as I could possibly go. I'm going to fish the biggest, freshest, liveliest bait, because I'm trying to tempt the predator who's not dumb. Okay? Now, again, if I'm live chumming and they're in a frenzy, you could put an apple out there on 400-pound multi-strand cable with a shark hook, and you probably get a blackfin to eat it. But of course, that's the rarity. And nowadays, pilchards just aren't as easy to come by as they used to be. Am I right? Okay, used to be, I don't know, who remembers the phenomenal pilchard fishery we had in Boca Inlet, right? I mean, you can go into Boca Inlet, you can black out every bait well on your boat, pulling up stringers with sabiki rigs 5 at a time until your arms fell off. It was that easy. You can anchor up at the pier. Like I said, put a chum bag in the water, and catching 500 pilchards was nothing. That's just not the case any longer. There's pollution, there's more boat traffic, there's more pressure, there's all of these factors that come into play. So it's becoming harder and harder to live chum. And if you want to buy the bait, well, bait's becoming more and more expensive. How much is a dozen pilchards up here now? What do they charge for that? $25. So we'll say $40 for a dozen pilchards. Let's not go there yet. Let's use the $24. Let's use $2 each, okay? $2 each, I need 300 to 500. Not only is it the question of money, okay, where do you get them? because not everybody, there's just not as many bait guys as there once was. And it's not easy to get 500 pilchards, especially during tournament time at all. We all know that. So unless you have a dedicated, which keep in mind, some of these boats, some of these big boats have dedicated crews and dedicated bait boats that do nothing but go out and catch bait. This is what they do. They go bait fishing. So when they're fishing these tournaments, they have the best baits possible, okay? How do you compete with that if you're just a weekend warrior? Can you compete with that? I don't think so. I don't think you can compete with that in overall weight, but you certainly can compete with that in the largest fish, because anybody can catch the largest blackfin tuna or wahoo or king mackerel. That's just being at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. You know, everybody has a chance at that. But to go out and catch, you know, 10 big blackfins, how do I compete against that guy if I'm not that guy? You know, it becomes very, very challenging. And what you're going to see soon this is a little bit different, but you'll understand what I'm saying. In big dollar tournaments, and I'm not talking about $10,000, $100,000, $30,000, you know, meat fish tournaments, or even $100,000 sailfish tournaments. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about $1 million marlin tournaments, the big time stuff, right? Big boats, big marlin tournaments. The latest technology in these big custom sport fish boats are something called sonars. What is a sonar? Essentially, I want you to picture somebody taking a 70-something foot custom sport fish yacht and drilling a hole the size of a 5-gallon bucket through the bottom of the boat. And then there's this big transducer that's about the size of a 5-gallon bucket, and you push a button and it slides down through the hole. And it's now protruding out the bottom of the boat. And it's like a radar, 360 degrees. And you can not only determine the radius, but how big that beam is that's going around. Now you may be thinking, what sense does that make? Well, here's a guy, he's trolling for blue marlin. And if he wins this tournament, not only is it worth $1 million, but he wants the prestige. He wants to be the guy that won the tournament. It's not even about the money. Heck, he's got an $8 million boat. He doesn't care about the money. He's got money to blow, but he wants to win the tournament. So he's got this sonar, and he's got a guy on the boat whose only job is to stare at the sonar screen and to make adjustments. And the guy at the sonar screen goes, boom, blue marlin, 12 o'clock, 3,000 feet. And the captain now goes, I don't see him. And he goes, oh, there he is, right there on the machine. And they start following that blue marlin. And then the blue marlin goes this way, and then he goes that way, and they go this way. And they chase him around for 2 hours before they finally cross paths with him. And the blue marlin comes up and eats a bait. And they win $1 million and win the tournament. So all of these big boats now have sonars because they got to be competitive. You're going to see that technology slowly making its way into your market. Heck, they already have it with all of this freshwater fancy stuff. You see this side imaging and live view. You can watch a bass eat your rubber worm. God! You can watch a bass eat your rubber worm from 50 feet away. Okay, that's all coming to our industry as well, to, you know, our sector as well. Point I'm making is technology. If you have it, use it. If you don't have it, you better get it. You know, and you better be zeroed in and dialed in, because if you don't, then you're going to be lucky just to pick off one big blackfin every now and then. But to do it consistently, you really, really need to be dialed in. And finally, like I say in all of my seminars, and this perhaps is the most important one to discuss this, is really angler failure and tackle failure. Okay, you get that big tuna, you're so excited, you finally got him, he's screaming line off the reel, you're hoping it's a big blackfin tuna, you're not sure yet, you're calling it, your buddy's like, dude, that's a big blackfin, that's a big blackfin, I know it's a big blackfin, you know, and he's telling you it is, and you're hoping it is, but you're really not sure, and then finally you see it, right? And he's doing his circles, and he's next to the boat, and your buddy gets real excited, and he reaches down with the gaff and hits the line, and there goes the blackfin, swimming away. And you go, Bob! Right? Did that ever happen to anybody? Okay. losing a fish because Bob swung the gaff and wrapped the line around the end of the gaff, or you socked down the drag, or the line was frayed. You know, a million different things could happen that are preventable and avoidable. We call those angler failure and tackle failure. The story I just told you about the cobia that came up and spit the jig out, that's not our fault. There's no angler failure or tackle failure on my boat, ever, ever. That was just a rare fish that decided to spit the jig out. There was nothing we could have did about that, and that's going to happen. You're not going to land every fish. It's just not going to happen, okay? Things are going to happen. You're not going to land every fish. But if you take the measures to avoid losing fish, you're going to be a far more successful angler. It only takes a second to change a leader, to feel it and go, hey, it's a little frayed up. Let me retie that. It only takes a second to double check a drag. I don't care, you know, even the most expensive, fanciest tackle in the world, the drag is still not bulletproof. It's adjustable. There are lever drags. If you're not sure how to operate a lever drag reel, going after big blackfin tuna is not where you want to learn how to do that. Okay, make sure that you know all of these things in advance. Like I said, right now, May and June are your peak times to get out there and target these fish. As far as eating quality, if you ask me, blackfin tuna rival the best yellowfin anywhere. Why? Because you can go over to Papo Huey's, whatever it is, okay? I'm just using that as an example because it's right here. And you can have some sashimi or something made out of yellowfin tuna, and it's delicious. How old is that yellowfin tuna? Because that blackfin tuna that I caught this morning that I'm eating right now, he's about 2 hours old, 3 hours old, that flesh. So my blackfin is far fresher and far better, in my opinion, than a restaurant's yellowfin. Okay? Now, if you took both fish side by side, you'd probably notice a difference. That yellowfin's a little bit lighter, a little bit better. But that's rarely the case. Blackfin tuna are absolutely awesome on the dinner table. You could eat them raw, sashimi, poke. I've made blackfin tuna burgers. I've made blackfin tuna so many ways, I just couldn't figure out how else to eat them, because you get a lot of blackfin tuna meat off of a 30-pound blackfin. They yield a lot of, okay? Make sure that you bleed them. You can simply cut their gills is the easiest way. If you're fishing a tournament, do not bleed your tuna. Why? It's going to lose weight. And in a tournament, first and third place is not separated by pounds, it's separated by ounces. And you lose 1 ounce. You know, it could cost you tens of thousands of dollars and a couple of places in the rankings. So don't bleed your tuna if you're fishing a tournament. Otherwise, I highly recommend you bleed it. Make sure it's in a nice slushy mix and you get that flesh, you know, that meat as cold as possible. At the end of the day, like all other fisheries, catching the big fatty, the big blackfin tunas, a lot of people call them butterballs, okay? You're going to get out of it what you put into it. If you're not willing to sleep, or if you're not willing to sacrifice other fish or put in the time, what can I tell you? Catch kingfish for the rest of your life.